In the early morning hours of a quiet, seemingly peaceful suburban neighborhood, a call came in that would leave officers haunted for the rest of their careers. A routine welfare check, the kind cops respond to regularly, was about to lead them to the most horrifying discovery they would ever make. This case would forever change the lives of the officers involved and bring attention to a chilling reality that existed just beneath the surface of this quiet town. On today's Crime Spot, we'll take you deep into this investigation, a case where police officers walked into a nightmare that no one could have possibly prepared them for. It all began on January 9th, 2017, in a peaceful suburban neighborhood just outside of Chicago. The call came in at 7:00 a.m. The local police department received a request for a welfare check on a 42-year-old woman named Patricia Hughes. Her family had become concerned after not hearing from her for several days. No one had seen her, and her phone went unanswered. Welfare checks are common. They often involve officers knocking on doors, trying to ensure someone is safe. Officers are used to dealing with situations where people have simply forgotten to call someone back, or where a person may be ill or having a minor emergency. But this was different. Patricia Hughes had lived in the area for over a decade, and there was nothing that stood out about her or her home. She wasn't known to be the type of person who would vanish without explanation. As officers made their way to her house, they had no idea they were about to uncover something so horrifying it would send shockwaves through the entire community. Officers arrived. The officers arrived at Patricia's home, a modest single-story house on a quiet street. Nothing about the house seemed unusual at first glance. The blinds were drawn, and the front yard was well kept, with a few potted plants lining the porch. The neighborhood was peaceful, with children's laughter drifting from nearby homes as the officers walked up the driveway. The officers knocked at the front door, but there was no response. They knocked again, louder this time, still no answer. After a brief discussion, they decided to check around the back of the house, hoping to find an open window or another way in. As one officer walked toward the back gate, he noticed something strange. The back door of the house was slightly ajar. His instincts told him something wasn't right. The door had been left unlocked in a way that felt intentional, not accidental. It was enough to raise red flags. Without hesitation, the officers pushed the door open and entered the house. They called out Patricia's name, but there was no answer. They moved cautiously through the hallway, their radios crackling as they communicated with each other. Every room seemed normal at first. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that something was amiss. But then, they reached the master bedroom. Dramatic pause. Inside the bedroom, the officers made a discovery that would forever haunt them. In the corner of the room, lying on the floor, was a large, blood-stained object covered with a sheet. At first, it wasn't clear what they were looking at, but as one officer lifted the sheet, his stomach turned. What they uncovered was the lifeless body of Patricia Hughes, but that wasn't the worst part. Her body had been mutilated in ways that no one could have imagined. Patricia's face had been beaten so severely that her features were barely recognizable. Her body had been drained of blood, a chilling detail that suggested she had been dead for days before being found. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was the ritualistic nature of the crime scene. There were strange symbols drawn in blood on the floor around her, and the room was eerily quiet, as if something dark had been unleashed in that very space. The officers stepped back, shocked by the brutality and darkness of what they were seeing. They immediately secured the scene and called for backup. A team of detectives was dispatched, and the house was roped off as a crime scene. What had initially appeared to be a routine welfare check had turned into a full-scale homicide investigation. Dark investigation. As detectives began their investigation, the puzzle pieces slowly started to come together. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a crime of passion. It was something far more sinister. The detectives scoured Patricia's home for any signs of who might be responsible. They found that she had been living alone, with no significant family nearby. Her neighbors described her as quiet but friendly. She had no known enemies, and there were no signs of domestic disputes or issues that would suggest a violent confrontation. Patricia had been a single woman who kept to herself, and nothing in her history hinted at any particular danger. Her online presence was minimal, and there were no known incidents of threats or violence leading up to her death. The lack of a motive only deepened the mystery. But it wasn't until they searched Patricia's computer that the detectives stumbled upon something truly horrifying. Unsettling, eerie. The search of Patricia's computer revealed chilling evidence that pointed to a much darker truth. The investigators uncovered multiple emails and messages from an online group that discussed occult rituals and dark ceremonies. The members of this group were all using aliases, and their conversations were filled with references to blood sacrifices and strange rituals. One particular email stood out. It was from a member named Nightshade, and it contained detailed instructions about how to prepare for a ritual involving the sacrifice of a human being, mentioning Patricia's address and even describing her physical features. It became clear that Patricia Hughes was the intended victim of a twisted cult. The ritualistic nature of the murder, the drawn symbols, and the detailed planning suggested that Patricia had been chosen for a reason, perhaps as part of a macabre ceremony. As detectives dug deeper into the online group, they discovered that the members had been meeting in secret for months, exchanging dark ideas and planning their ritualistic acts. But what they didn't know was that Nightshade wasn't just a faceless name. He was someone within Patricia's inner circle. Suspense. The truth was even darker than they imagined. Nightshade turned out to be a man named Daniel Foster, Patricia's ex-boyfriend. They had been involved in an on-again, off-again relationship for years, and although they had broken up several months prior to her death, Daniel was still obsessed with Patricia. He had become involved in a dangerous cult that promised power through rituals of blood and sacrifice, and he believed that Patricia was the perfect candidate for their twisted ceremonies. On the night of Patricia's murder, Daniel had entered her home under the guise of reconciliation, but in reality, he had planned the brutal ritual in advance. He used his knowledge of Patricia's habits and routines to strike when she would be most vulnerable. The cult's influence over him had pushed him to commit this unthinkable act. Daniel was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, among other offenses related to the cult's activities. His arrest was the final piece in the puzzle, and the community was left in shock, trying to comprehend the depths of evil that had existed right under their noses. The tragic and horrifying murder of Patricia Hughes serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lie beneath the surface of everyday life. The discovery made by the officers that day was beyond what anyone could have expected. A peaceful neighborhood shattered by a crime so gruesome, it left everyone in disbelief. As for the officers involved, they will never forget the horrors they uncovered that morning. The sight of Patricia's mutilated body, the eerie symbols drawn around her, and the knowledge that a cult was operating in their community left an indelible mark on their memories. This is CrimeSpot, and this was the most horrifying discovery of the officers' lives. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to stay updated on our latest true crime stories.